about a woman in Hong Kong whose name is Anita Moorjani. She's an author, a Hay House author now, and she's written a book, a powerful book. And I read this story about Anita, and it seems that on the 2nd of February, in the year 2006, this woman was wheeled into a hospital in Hong Kong. She had been sick for 5 years. Her organs had all shut down. Her family was gathered at the emergency room. Her husband, who was here tonight, I'm honored to have met, beautiful man named Danny. And the doctors had told her family and her husband that these were her last hours. She was down to 86 or 88 pounds. Anita emerged from her coma, some 30 hours in a coma. And she has a story to tell that is so compelling. And she's here from Hong Kong to share with you some of the lessons that she learned while she was in this comatose state and what she came back to teach us. She's one of the most beautiful human beings I've ever been privileged to know and honored to support and write a foreword for her book. And she's here with us today, and I'd love you to meet her. Anita Moorjani, please, come on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Who would have thought I would get to Sedona from Hong Kong? Wow. I mean, I've been dead and back, but this is a challenge. I used to be afraid of public speaking. And the first time Wayne Dyer pulled me up on stage at one of his I Can Do It events, I stood there in front of 2,500 people, and I was really nervous. This was just a little over a year ago. And he said to me, "How do you feel?" Right there, while I was standing there in front of everybody. I said, "Really nervous." And he said, "You've been dead and back. What do you have to be scared about?" And I think it was in that moment that I realized that I had nothing to fear, at least as far as public speaking goes. So, you know, you can't imagine how happy I am to be here, not just here in Sedona, but to be alive, to be here physically in this life. Because life is really such a gift. And the sad thing is that most people don't value what they have until they lose it. And so my purpose for standing here and sharing my story with you is because I don't want you to only realize the gift that is life at the point in time when you are about to lose it. I want you to know it now. I had an experience, as you all know. I shouldn't be here. I should have died on February the 2nd, 2006. If the doctors were right, I wouldn't be here. On that day, I was in a coma, and I went into a coma because of end-stage cancer. And as many of you know already, at that point in time, my organs were shutting down. I had tumors, some of them the size of lemons, all over my body, starting from the base of my skull, all around my neck, down under my arms, my chest, all the way down to my abdomen. My muscles were completely wasted away. I couldn't walk. I couldn't really lift my arms. I couldn't even lift my head up. My head was like this all the time. And I weighed about 85 pounds. I would either be sitting in a wheelchair or lying in bed When I would lie down, I would choke on my own fluid because my lungs were filled with fluid. I had to have the fluid from my lungs removed every few days before it would accumulate again. I had these huge open skin lesions where the toxins were coming out of my skin. And when I went into a coma, the doctors told my family that these were my final hours. Unbeknownst to everyone around me, though, my awareness during that time when I was in a coma was actually heightened. I was aware of everything that was going on around me. I was aware of everything the doctors were doing, all the conversations that were taking place. I was aware of my family, my husband standing or sitting by my bedside, and my mother. My mother was praying to Shiva and Ganesha. My husband was just sitting by my bedside holding my hand and watching the dials above my bed, willing for me to come back. But I was also aware of what they were feeling, and I was aware of everything that even the doctors were feeling, and the nurses and everybody who was treating me. It was like I shared their same essence, like I could feel, like I shared their consciousness. But not only that, the most amazing thing was that for the first time in my life, I felt this incredible feeling of unconditional love. It was like I was embraced by this feeling of total unconditional love. It's really hard to describe this feeling because it's much more powerful than any kind of love that I've ever experienced in physical life before. It was truly unconditional in that for the first time in my life, I felt I didn't have to do anything to prove myself or do anything to deserve it. I was loved just because I existed. I felt as though I had always been loved, but had never realized it. In that realm, I realized that I had actually always been loved, but never knew. I also felt as though my consciousness was expanding so that it stretched far greater, much more than the room that my physical body was contained in. I was aware of my body lying there on the hospital bed. But it was as though my consciousness was far bigger than my body, and the body actually looked insignificant to me. And my consciousness continued to expand. And it felt as though time and space was very different in that realm. It was as though I could be anywhere at any time. There was no time lapse, like I could travel any distance and there would be no time lapse. It was as though everything was happening simultaneously. The best way I can describe it is as though I was viewing my life or lives. It was as though I could see what were past lives plus my future, and I could see it all happening simultaneously, as though I was viewing a tapestry. And this is what I mean about it happening all at once. Like when you're viewing a tapestry, you see the entire completed tapestry. There's no time lapse between the time you see this color or this part and that part. I was able to see it all at once. It was as though all my lives were happening simultaneously. Everything was just so clear. And it was like I was one thread woven in that tapestry. I could see where I had been. I could see where I had yet to go. But I could also see there were choices. That if I went this way, this would happen. And if I went this way, this would happen. And there were parts of the tapestry that were still unfinished. I could see all the lives I had already touched and all the lives that I had yet to touch. I became aware of my father's essence. Now, I just want to add here, though, that in that realm, because time didn't exist in the way it does here. Here we perceive in linear time, where we perceive one thought or one moment of time at a time and we string it together to make linear time. It's not like that there. It's like all of time is existing all at once. So in the retelling of my story, I'm telling it in linear time and I have to give it a sequence. But this isn't the exact sequence in which it happened. I encountered the essence of my father. When I was growing up, my father and I had a very turbulent relationship because my parents are Indian. They tried to bring me up with Hindu cultural values, but I rebelled against them, particularly because I was actually brought up in a multicultural society. I went to school with British children, but the local people where I lived were Chinese. I lived in a Chinese country and went to a British school. So I spoke 3 languages simultaneously. I spoke my parents' language at home, I spoke English at school, and I spoke Chinese with the local people. And when you're exposed or immersed in 3 cultures simultaneously and you speak their language fluently, you're exposed to different cultural values, and many of these values can contradict each other. And so I used to argue with my parents about their cultural values. I mean, to give you a simple example, in the Hindu culture, you absolutely must not eat beef because the cow is revered as a mother figure. Now, all the kids at my school were going to McDonald's and eating hamburgers. So I couldn't understand why I couldn't do what they were doing. So these kinds of things, as a youngster, I would push against my parents. As I got older, it got a little more complicated. My parents wanted me to have an arranged marriage. I didn't. Finally, they arranged a marriage for me, but just before the wedding day, I ran away, which brought a lot of shame and embarrassment to my family, the groom's family, and to our community. I was ostracized from the Indian community, and my parents were told that no Indian man in our community would ever marry me. But of course, I met my wonderful husband. So during my life, I had always felt that I'd let my father down. I'd always felt that I'd disappointed him. I always felt that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't Indian enough. I never met his expectations. I felt as though my entire life he was preparing me to get married. It was like his biggest wish was for me to get married. And finally, just a few months before my wedding day, he passed away. So I was really sad when he passed away, because this was the one thing I wanted him to see, was my wedding. I wanted him to see me happy and married. When I met my father's essence in the other realm, I was ready to feel again the guilt or the judgment. But all I felt from him was pure, unconditional love. And I realized that all he had ever felt for me was unconditional love, although it hadn't seemed that way. I realized that love gets very distorted in this dimension, in this realm. In that realm, I started to understand that when we cross over, not only do we leave behind our physical bodies, our physical biology, our bodies, but with our bodies goes our gender, which we leave behind. We leave behind our race, our culture. We leave behind our ego, our values. All these get left behind. So what crosses over? Our essence, our pure essence, our consciousness. Once you've stripped all these layers and layers of filters away, that essence that is left, That essence is pure, unconditional love. It's just pure before it's been diluted and filtered through all our cultural conditionings and gender conditionings and so on, and ego responses. So in that realm, I encountered my father, and all I felt from him was pure, unconditional love. And I understood that that's all he had ever felt for me. And even when he tried to get me married, he did it out of love, because he believed that the most loving thing he could do was to find me a good husband, because that was his cultural belief. I understood that even though I had always thought I was a victim of my culture, I realized that in a sense, either we are all victims or none of us are victims, because even he is a victim of his culture in the same way I was. He was just bringing me up in the best way he knew how, doing it as lovingly as he knew how to do. This brought me huge understanding of how so many of us are well-meaning, but it doesn't always appear that way when we express through all these various filters we have. I also realized in that realm that even though I was looking for forgiveness from my father, I realized that what I got from him was something far more than forgiveness. It was pure compassion and empathy. And that is far deeper than forgiveness, because when you forgive someone, what you're really saying is that you've hurt me, you've wronged me, but I'm going to forgive you anyway. So it's like you judge the person, that they've done something wrong, but you're going to forgive them. What I felt from him was something far deeper and far beyond that. It was more a feeling of, you didn't do anything wrong, you did everything the best you knew how. And that's all I felt for him and from him. I also encountered the essence of my best friend. She had passed away 2 years before my near-death experience. She also had suffered from cancer. And I had missed her painfully as I was going through the cancer myself. And I had also felt tremendous guilt, because during her last few months of life before she died, I had been unable to see her because I couldn't deal with her illness. I couldn't deal with her deteriorating body. Every time I went to see her, it had brought me fear, because I was already suffering from cancer. And it made me feel that this is what I had in store for me, because her deterioration was very, very rapid. So I couldn't bear to see her the last few months. So when I got the call from her sister that she had finally passed, I was really devastated. And when I saw her in the other realm, again, all I felt from her was just unconditional love. And it was just the most amazing feeling to connect with her. During this time while I was in the coma, my brother was in India trying to reach Hong Kong. I was in Hong Kong, lying in a hospital bed in Hong Kong. My brother was trying to reach me before I died. I even became aware that he was trying to get on a flight. And I even recall thinking to myself that I have to stay alive. I mustn't die before he gets here. I reached a point where I realized that I had a choice of whether I wanted to come back into my physical body or go onward into death. At that point, I absolutely did not want to come back here into the physical body, because it was just so amazing in the other realm. I had never recalled ever feeling so light before, and so liberated. The fear was gone, the fear of the cancer, the pain. I had suffered for 4 years in discomfort. It was all gone. there was no reason to go back to that physical body. Not only had I been suffering, but my family had been suffering, caring for me. And I just couldn't see a single reason to go back. But it was in that moment that it seemed my Father impressed upon me that it's not your time. You need to go back. There are still some gifts for you. And I felt as though I didn't quite understand at first, because what I felt was, what is the point of going back to a sick body? But also it seemed that in the same instant, it was as though I had this vision of clarity, or like I had entered another dimension. And this other dimension or realm it was like I had this feeling of incredible clarity, where suddenly everything made sense. And I understood. I understood why I had the cancer. I understood how everything in my life had led me to that point in time where I was lying there dying on that hospital bed. I understood also that we are amazing, magnificent, powerful beings, because I felt my energy, my essence was so huge and powerful and amazing, powerful beyond my imagination, beyond anything I could ever have known before. And I realized that I had never known this. It was the first time that I knew this. And then I realized that now that I knew what I knew, if I go back into my body, my cancer was going to heal. And it was at that moment that my Father impressed upon me, now that you know the truth, go back and live your life fearlessly. And it was at that time that I started to open my eyes and come out of the coma. And as I opened my eyes, I saw my family, I saw my husband, my mother, my brother who had just arrived. And they were all there, and they were smiling because I started to open my eyes. And at first, even though I was opening my eyes and I started talking a little bit, I could hardly talk, and I was very, very groggy. And it seems that I wasn't making any sense. I started to say things like, Dad said I was going to be okay, Dad was there. And they had no idea what I was talking about. But they were just happy that I looked like I was coming out of the coma. And then a little while later, the doctor walked into the room, and he was surprised that I was coming out of the coma, and he actually said, this is wonderful that she's coming out of the coma. And I greeted him by his name. I said, good afternoon, Dr. Chan, and I was very groggy. I said it groggily. And apparently, I had never seen this doctor before until after I'd gone into the coma. That was the first time he treated me. So he looked at me and he said, how do you know my name? And I said, aren't you the one that took the fluid out of my lungs in the middle of the night? And he said, yeah, but you were in a coma. How would you know that? And I was still very groggy. I said I was. And when he left the room, I said to my husband, why was he so surprised that I recognized him? Isn't he the one that said to you that my organs are shutting down and I won't make it through the night? And my husband said, yeah, but he didn't say that in this room. Apparently, the conversation had taken place 40 feet down the hallway and the door had been shut. And I had been aware of everything that was happening. Over the days, I started to tell them more and more. And I started to remember more and more, because the first couple of days I was really confused. But more interestingly, I said to the doctors, you can remove the oxygen tube. I don't need it anymore. And sure enough, I didn't need the oxygen. I told them they could remove the food tube. And the doctors were getting really, really surprised. Now, within 4 days, my tumors shrunk by about 70% just to the touch. And even though my body was still very weak, I wanted to sit up. I wanted to talk. It was like I was euphoric. I knew something had happened, but I still didn't understand exactly what had happened. And because I was feeling so euphoric, it was like I still couldn't walk yet, but I just felt so happy. And normally I love listening to music. I absolutely love music, all kinds of music. So I was telling my husband that I want to listen to my music. Can you bring my iPod? And so he brought my iPod into the hospital. And bear in mind, I was in the intensive care unit, separated only by curtains between the other patients. And my husband brought my iPod in. And because I still had the wires connected to me and to my heart and things in my veins, and because I had all these big Band-Aids because of the open skin lesions, I couldn't put the earphones in. So he set up these little speakers by my bedside. And I wanted to listen to Dancing Queen by ABBA over. It's such a happy song. And so I was in my bed just shaking and listening to Dancing Queen over and over. And I was laughing. And then, and my husband said, you know, and I hadn't eaten in months, and that's why my muscles had wasted away. And the doctors said, you've got to eat. And I said, yes, I'm ready to eat. And they said, what's the first thing you want? I said, chocolate ice cream. And surprisingly, they actually said, that's all right, you can have that because it's soothing for the throat. They just removed the food tube. And so there I was with the chocolate ice cream and listening to Dancing Queen. And finally, one of the nurses came in and she said, the families of the other patients are complaining. They said, you're causing a disruption in the intensive care unit. So they had to move me to a regular room. And the doctor said that these open skin lesions I had, the doctor said they would have to call in a reconstructive surgeon to actually stitch them up because they were so big, the wounds were so big, they were not going to heal on their own, particularly because I was still very malnourished. They said I didn't have the strength to heal. What subsequently happened was that the reconstructive surgeon came in and said that definitely he would need to do surgery, but I was too weak, so he would come back in 3 weeks. When he came back 3 weeks later, he said the wounds have started to heal all by themselves, I won't need surgery. Not only that, but about 9 days after my NDE, the doctors were actually waiting for me to get stronger so that they could continue to give me treatments and do tests, run tests like biopsies. So about 9 days after my NDE, they wanted to do a bone marrow biopsy. I kept telling them that you won't find any cancer. I know I'm healed. I know why I'm back now. And they said, that's fine. It's fine you think that way, but we need to do what we need to do. And they said, cancer doesn't just disappear like that. We just have to find it. And they did the bone marrow biopsy and there was no trace of cancer. And they still said that, nope, the cancer doesn't disappear. Now we'll have to do a lymph node biopsy. And when they sent me to the radiologist office for him to mark a lymph node using the ultrasound, he was really surprised because he said he couldn't even find a lymph node big enough to suggest cancer when the scans on his light box showed that just 3 weeks previously, my entire neck was covered with tumors and enlarged lymph nodes. The oncologist, however, insisted that I still have a biopsy on any lymph node. And they confirmed that there was no trace of cancer. Finally, they did a full-body PET scan, and although I was receiving treatments, they confirmed that they could cut the treatments short, and they sent me home from the hospital because it was confirmed there was no trace of cancer in my body. And finally, they sent me home after 5 weeks in the hospital, because by that point, I was strong enough to walk around and take care of myself and to go out. On the day they were releasing me to go home, I was actually ecstatic. I was thinking, I've been sick for so long. The first thing I wanted to do was to go shopping. And when the doctors were releasing me, the doctor actually said to me, "Oh, you must be so happy to go home." I said, "Yes, absolutely." And he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to go shopping." And he said, "No, you're absolutely not going to go shopping. You're still weak and there are people in the shops. You're going to go home and rest." And he actually wrote on my discharge slip, "Released to go home for further rest, no shopping." The interesting thing was that this was actually later picked up by another oncologist who studied my case much later, when an oncologist flew to Hong Kong to study my medical records. He actually contacted me and he said, "In your medical records, your oncologist has said no shopping." And I said, "Yeah, that's right." So the reason I'm here today, as I mentioned to you, is because the biggest thing I learned is that life is really a gift. And there's a reason why I'm here, and there's a reason why every single one of you are here. And I want to convey to you the value of your life and how important it is for you to be here right now. I don't stand here before you as some enlightened guru or enlightened master, because I'm certainly no more enlightened than anyone else that sits here in this room. It's just that something happened to me that taught me a few lessons. And these are lessons I wish I knew. I wish somebody told me. And that's why I want to share them with you. And I'm a simple person, so I like to keep my lessons really, really simple. So the first lesson, and the most important lesson I learned about life, or what I learned that I believe saved my life, is that I learned that it is extremely important to love yourself. Very, very important. And I cannot stress this enough. And it was the love I felt coming for me that saved my life. I never knew before that, before my near-death experience, that I was supposed to love myself unconditionally. The love I felt in the other realm, it doesn't matter where or who it was coming from, because all of us have different philosophies of how we like to see life. I don't like to put labels on anything. So whether the love comes from Jesus or Allah or Krishna or Buddha, it doesn't matter. Whether it came from my father, it's all God. The love was still unconditional. And that love that I felt told me that I was deserving and I was worthy of being loved. And it made me realize that it's okay to love myself. Most of us don't know this while growing up. While we are children, we don't realize, or even as we grow up, when we're teenagers and in our 20s, we don't realize that it's okay to love ourselves. When we're born, we know it's okay to love ourselves. When we're born, we're happy little children. Look at babies. Babies are so full of themselves and they're so joyful. And then we spend a lifetime getting it conditioned out of us. And then halfway through our life, we then start reading self-help books and going to courses to bring it back into our lives, to find it again. So what I want to tell you is that really, if you loved yourself, so many of your problems and issues in life would actually be solved and healed. Now I want to just ask you, honestly speaking, before you embarked on a journey, on a self-searching journey or whatever journey, before you started reading books on spiritual things, say when you were much younger, were you ever taught that it's important to love yourself? I want a show of hands. How many of you were actually taught that it is important to love yourself? Okay, a few of you. But literally, I think I can count maybe 5 hands. Now here's what happens when you love yourself. When you love yourself and you fill yourself up, you have a lot more to give other people, because you cannot give people what you yourself don't have. When you give and give and give, but you're empty inside, and you just keep giving because maybe for some reason you've learned that it's selfish to love yourself, it's selfish to give yourself, and it's selfless to give. You've got to be loving, you've got to keep being generous with your love and doing for other people, and you keep doing and doing and doing, and then imagine that you become drained, which is very common, which is what I did. I became drained to the point I got cancer. Now imagine you start to become drained and tired of giving, and you realize that people aren't giving back to you. And now you feeling a little bit needy, like you need some support, but it's not coming back to you. What do you feel? You feel resentment towards the people you've been giving and giving who aren't giving back to you. And when you feel resentment for them, what happens is that it makes your love for them conditional. And that is the start of a dysfunctional relationship. And that's why we have so many relationships that are breaking down. Now, you imagine if you allow yourself to fulfill yourself, you allow yourself to love yourself enough that you allow yourself to find your joy. Now, people who love themselves, who allow themselves to find their joy and feel joyful about life, are the most fun and generous people to be around. And when you love yourself to the point where you are feeling fulfilled, self-actualized, then the love that comes from you is unconditional, because you don't need anything back from anybody. The love you give is pure and unconditional. And that is the most important lesson I learned. Because let me tell you a little bit about the person I used to be. I used to believe that it was selfish to love myself. I used to believe that I had to love other people more than I loved myself. And what that meant was that I gave and gave until I became so drained. It also meant that I was a people pleaser. I didn't want anybody to dislike me. I wanted to make sure that I was pleasing everybody and doing things for everybody and anybody except me. When I had cancer, for the first time, the cancer gave me permission to do stuff for myself. It gave me permission to receive. I want to give you all permission to receive. I want you to know that it's okay to receive. Don't wait until something happens. Thank you. And this is so important for you to know. We learn from the time we're very young that we need to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. But then we don't learn to love ourselves. Maybe that's why everybody's so messed up. The other interesting thing you'll find that happens when you learn to love yourself is that you will find that other people love you more when you love yourself more. You will also find that other people respect you as much as you respect yourself. Other people value you as much as you value yourself. And the more that you love yourself, the more love you have to give, and also you'll find the more other people love you. There's really no downside, and I cannot figure out why this is such a huge secret. I just can't figure, because there's no downside. People say that it's egotistical to love yourself. No, the ones who are the most egotistical or narcissistic are the ones who don't love themselves, and they're overcompensating. It's the other way around. The people who love themselves are the most generous and joyful people to be around. And people have asked me, well, how much love for self is too much? There's no such thing as too much. Our planet suffers from too little self-love. And when we love ourselves, we stop judging ourselves so harshly. We become kinder to ourselves. And when you are kinder to yourself, you're kinder to other people. When you stop judging yourself, you stop judging other people. People who we see as very critical, judgmental, they're actually even more critical and judgmental inwardly towards themselves. What you are inside is what you express outside. So the more you love yourself inside, the more you'll show that outside. So that is really the number one key thing. The second thing that I learned, which is really important, is to live your life fearlessly. Be yourself fearlessly. It's really important to be fearless. And what do I mean by fearless? I mean that stop fearing things like what other people think of you. Most people don't really care. I used to worry so much about what people thought of me. I was, as I said, a people pleaser. So I feared everything. I feared what people thought of me. I feared not being good enough. I feared failing. I used to treat myself like a doormat. I would put myself last. I would always put other people ahead of me. When I would do things for people, I didn't do it from a place of love because I didn't do it because I wanted to do it for them. I did it because I feared what they would think of me if I didn't do it. So every choice, every decision I made came from a place of fear, not from a place of love. The same with the kind of foods I chose to eat. If I chose to eat healthy food, I didn't choose it because I valued my life and wanted to be healthy and live long. I did it because I feared illness. I took supplements and I was obsessive about them because I feared illness. I feared everything. I was obsessive about things. I had a lot of obsessive compulsive behaviors, all of which disappeared with the coma and the near-death experience. So I lived a life where every decision was made from fear. People tell me that some fears are good because fear keeps you safe. But I disagree, because fear actually immobilizes you. Love keeps you safe. If you love yourself, you'll never put yourself in danger. You won't put other people in danger. When you love yourself, when you love your life, you value your life, you will keep yourself safe. The other really important thing I learned, which I talked about a little bit, is that life is a gift. Most of us don't realize that, and as I said, it's a shame that we don't learn things or we don't realize things until it's taken away from us. We don't realize the value of things until it's taken away. The thing about life, what I learned, is that everything about life is a gift, even the challenges. We're here to experience life, so we're here to even experience the challenges. When I had cancer, I never would have thought that was a gift. I suffered a lot, terribly, and if anybody told me that was a gift, I would have thought it was absolute nonsense because I was suffering so much. But today, I know that was the biggest gift that life could ever have given me, because I wouldn't be standing here today in beautiful Sedona, Arizona, if that hadn't happened to me. Thank you.